Welcome to something a little bit different on Boss United FM. Today we're going to create a tier list of Premier League and EFL clubs. 91 clubs to be ranked from elite to Tinpot. There will be several entries I know you won't agree with. Feel free to comment down below where you think I've gone wrong. I think our first club is Portsmouth, so let's get on with it. Right, Portsmouth. Might have to motor through some of these just because there's 91 of them to get through. Recent FA Cup winners? Okay, fairly recent. So I'm actually going to say they're big. They're not average, are they? They're quite a big club for their level. Mansfield, I'm actually going to say tiny because they've not really made it out of League Two in any recent history. Okay, they've not looked like going down either, but there we go. Cheltenham, I think this is, so they're just tiny. They're historically a non-league club. Leyton Orient, they're a small London club, essentially, competing with Spurs and West Ham for fans, really. MK Dons, Tinpot, Leicester City. I'm going to put big. They're not massive. Okay, they've won the Premier League, but that was only the once. And yes, they're doing really well this season, but overall, I'd put them as big comparatively against the rest of the 91. Sunderland, they're actually pretty much on a par with Leicester, I would say. Okay, recent history as they've gone alternate ways, but Sunderland, they're a huge club for League One. West Ham, I'm actually going to put massive. That might be a little bit controversial. Okay, they've spent time out of the top tier in the last few years, but yeah, they've got their brand new Olympic Stadium, which not everybody's a fan of, but they've got 60,000 people watching them now. Southend, probably equivalent to Leyton Orient, really. They're same-ish area, that sort of like Essex, East London area. They're quite equivalent. Newcastle, gonna have to put them with Sunderland, but potentially you would say in the next few years that Newcastle have got the potential to go massive if they can get the right manager in, if they've got all this money coming in, the right players at the right time. Exeter, another team that play at St James Park, I'm just going to actually go tiny. They're a really well-run club. I think they're still fan-owned, I think. But, yeah, they're just not a very big club. Same with Rochdale. They're another tiny club compared to the rest of the professional clubs. They've got massive neighbours in City and United, and they've got other clubs around them like Oldham, now Salford, and also you've got Stockport who's hanging around there as well. Fulham, historically, I would say big. Yeah, they've spent time in Championship and the Premier League recently, but several years ago they were one of probably the better clubs. When I say several years ago, I mean sort of like 50, 60 years ago maybe. Cambridge, yeah, tiny. They're Dion Dublin's old club, but whether that's what they're most famous for, is it because of the university? Don't know, but yeah, tiny. Norwich, I think they're an equivalent club to Fulham. They're a bit of a yo-yo club fairly recently. Yeah, they was in League One, but came back out of it. Brentford, I'm going to say average. Actually, no, I'm going to put them quite small, but if you do this in maybe a couple of years' time, they'll probably bump up to average because of their new ground. Is that Tranmere? Another club that just because of their neighbours, they are comparatively tiny. Yeah, they've got a decent sized ground, and it was a hell of a ground for the conference when they were in there, but that was only a couple of years ago. Blackpool, I think the equivalent to Brentford, they've got potential. They did realise a bit of potential under Ian Holloway getting to the Premier League, but they came straight back down. They need to go back to the days of Stanley Matthews, etc. Bristol Rovers, unfortunately, from their point of view, probably the second best team in Bristol. I'm sure they can't really argue that at the moment. Charlton, probably the first team to go as average. They had several years in the Premier League, in the 90s under Kerbishley. As soon as he left, that was it. Bottom fell out, and I don't think they've been back since. QPR, probably the same as Charlton. They've had several years in the Premier League whilst it's been there, but just recently they've not really threatened to go up. Swindon, yeah, Premier League at the start of the 90s, wasn't it? Under, I think it was Hoddle that got them up, then John Gorman tried to keep them up. But just recently, I'd probably say quite small, because there is still that little bit of potential there. Port Vale, tiny. What have they done recently? Yeah, they might have Robbie Williams as a fan, but Plymouth, they're just small. They're similar to Bristol Rovers. They're a club that probably goes between League One and League Two. Atkinson Stanley, who are they indeed? They're just a tiny club, but from their point of view, that's their selling point. They're a small club in a league that's got big clubs, but they do really, really well. They probably have the smallest budget in League One and probably smaller than a lot of League Two clubs, yet they still manage to do pretty well. Rotherham, new ground a few years ago, that's probably bumped them up a little bit, so I'm just going to put small. Yeah, they've had time in the Championship, but they've never really looked like being anything more than a relegation battler. Hull City, I think they're equivalent to Charlton and QPR. They've had a few years at the top level, but it wasn't that long ago that they were in, League 2 or Division 3 as it was then. Bournemouth, they're a team that over the last 20 years they've gone up both in leagues and stature, but they're a tiny Premier League club, which probably makes them an average club overall. Chelsea, they're massive. Okay, if this was just over the last 20 years, you'd probably put them as elite. But go back to early 90s, the 80s. What did they do? Their ground was an absolute mess. But yeah, it's a good modern ground now. But they were still looking to replace it, knock it down and build on top of it. Southampton, they're similar to Bournemouth, but I'm actually going to put them as big nowadays. They've had a few years at St Mary's, which has bumped them up from... This is probably what Bournemouth will need to be in, 5 years' time or so. Coventry, a team whose new ground actually saw them go down, and they've never returned from the top division. So they're in the average. They're a club that's had Premier League experience, but don't look like returning anytime soon. Everton, they're massive. They've won a few competitions in their history. The 80s was a time where they did really well, but unfortunately so did their neighbours. They won the FA Cup in was it 95? But yeah, they're a massive club, and they're a club moving to a new ground. Forest Green Rovers. Unfortunately, I'm going to put Tinpot, because basically they've relied on money to get them up through the non-league divisions into the conference, and they're looking at building a new ground which is miles away from where they already are. Fleetwood, it's weird because they're a team that's on the up and have spent lots of money upgrading their ground, upgrading their training ground, but they're still a team that's actually way above where they should be. Aston Villa, again, they're a massive club comparative to the rest of the 91. Arguably the biggest team in the West Midlands. Watford, I'm just going to put them... Now I'm going to put them in average. Recently, because I've had a few years in the Prem, they can be big. If they go down, they'll probably revert back to being average. Salford, I think I have to go Tinpot. They're only there because of the money and their owners. The class of 92, plus Peter Lim, the billionaire from the Far East. They were a club that played in Tangerine and got crowds of around 100. As soon as the money men come in and the big names, and suddenly they're in the Football League. Bristol City, quite small. They're another team that's on the up. They've upgraded their stadium. They've got a massive stand at Ashton Gate. They've made steady progress under their manager Lee Johnson. Sheffield United, another bit of a historic yo-yo club, so I think they go into average in a few years. If they've stayed up in the Premier League, yeah, they might move up to big. Burton, they're nothing but tiny. They are a small club. Again, they're like Atkinson. Yeah, and they made it to the Championship. And I think they survived one season, then went down the second, mainly thanks to Nigel Clough, who's just recently left them again. But at some point, they may well just drop back like a stone. Peterborough United, I think they go into this small part with like Plymouth and all that. Maybe they'll make it to quite small if they somehow win promotion this season through the playoffs, if they get played. But they're a club that whenever they've been in the Championship in the last 20 years or so, they've just come straight back down. Wolves, I think they're equivalent to Sheffield United. They're doing just as well as each other. A club, bit of money behind them to get them up, the Portuguese connection. But they've done pretty well. They're playing in Europe at the moment, so they're inching their way towards being big. Crystal Palace, similar. They're similar to Sheffield United and Hull. A team that could theoretically go down, but generally have a decent chance of coming back up again. Grimsby, yes, several years ago they had a few seasons in Division 1, but as soon as they fell out of that, they kind of dropped and then went into non-league. I'm going to have to put them as tiny. Crewe, I'm actually going to put them as small because they've got such a fantastic reputation for bringing through good players. Going back, 30 years really. The likes of Robbie Savage, Danny Murphy, Dean Ashton. And they seem to play football the right way. They give their managers quite a lot of time. And yeah, just a well-run club. Millwall, I'm just going to put quite small because they've not been in the Prem, so that they don't really warrant the status of the Sheffield Uniteds, the Coventry. Yeah. Preston North End. 130 years ago, they'd be elite. But just recently, I think I'm going to put them quite small. They spent a bit of time at League One level. They've been at Championship level for a little while now. Every now and then they get a chance at the playoffs, but they don't seem to make it. Wycombe, historically a non-league club. I think they're another team that goes into tiny. They're doing really well under Gareth Ainsworth, and they may end up going up this season if the season gets finished, but which then might bump them up to small. But historically, they're a tiny club. Walsall, they've got a decent setup, decent little ground in the West Midlands. Problem is, plenty of teams around them, but yeah, just small for me. Brighton, there's a team that's been on the up for the last 10 years or so. Massive boost when they got their brand new stadium. I'm going to put them into average because they're doing alright. They're staying up in the Prem. If they go down, it'll be interesting to see how the club reacts, but we'll see. Doncaster, another team that spent time in non-league. I'm just going to put them at small because overall they've got a decent stadium. They seem to have sorted themselves out since getting relegated into the conference and getting promotion back. Blackburn, one of the few Premier League winners, so I think that gives them at least average status. Yeah, I'm just going to put them in average. It's been a long while, so it was 1994-5, I think, when they won the Premier League. Arsenal, they're probably the first elite club to come up. They've won the Premier League so many times. Yeah, they've not won it for a little while. That's stagnating under Wenger, but yeah, they still win the FA Cup quite regularly. AFC Wimbledon, from the ashes of the original Wimbledon, all the way up from the Combined Counties League, all the way through, and they're in League One, and they're currently rebuilding Plough Lane, a couple of doors up from where the original Wimbledon used to play. Newport, one of the few Welsh clubs still in the Football League, came up fairly recently, up through the divisions, and yeah, they're nothing but tiny. Leeds, I'm going to put them in massive. They're definitely not elite because they've been out of the Premier League for so long, but they've still get thousands and thousands at home and away every week in the Championship. Oldham Athletic. I'm just going to put them at small because they're a team that did spend time at the top level in the early 90s, FA Cup semi-finals, but unfortunately they're on their way down in terms of their stature. Stoke, average. Team really recently relegated out of the Premier League after a few seasons, but until their rise from, Division 2 into the Prem under Pulis, bit of an up and down. Burnley, I'm actually going to put them as big nowadays because they've got a good reputation now in the Premier League. They play the football the way they want to play it, the way Dyche wants to play it. He's a really good manager. He gets the best out of his players. And it's very rare that they're in danger of going down. Bolton, now, unfortunately, well, I don't know. I think they're still a big-ish club, especially for League One. So I'm going to put them in average. But it's more than likely in 2-3 years, if they're still in existence, they're going to go down. Unless they get taken over, somebody puts a bit of money in and they sort themselves out. Right, we're on to the last few-ish. Oxford United, quite small. They've got potential. I know they've had some owner issues in the past. They've got a three-sided stadium at the Cassan, but yeah, fairly decent size. Macclesfield, they're tiny. They're small budget, still struggle to pay that, so unfortunately they're down as tiny. Shrewsbury, I'm going to put a small. Until fairly recently, they probably would have been tiny. Another team that went out the Football League, came back up, but just recently they've done all right. Huddersfield. They're a weird team. I think they was hovering around, Championship, League One for a little while. I'm going to put them in average because they had a season where they stayed up in the Prem, but no great shakes, and they've not really done much since they've gone back down to the Championship. Sheffield Wednesday. I'm going to put them as big. Historically, they are a big club. They might not have shown it over the last few years, but they spent time in the Prem. They got to FA Cup and League Cup finals in the 90s. Yeah. Forest. I'm going to put them as big. Like Villa, they're a former European Cup winner, but it was a long time ago. Threatened to challenge to get back into the Prem, but they're on the edge between big and average, I think. Cardiff City, another Welsh club. I'm just going to put them as average. They're a decent sized club in the Championship, but been in the Prem under Warnock, and we'll see how they go on the next few years. Ipswich, another historically quite large-ish club, kind of, but when they did win the UEFA Cup, they were massively overachieving, but I'm just going to put them in average. Stevenage, unfortunately, they're just a small club. It looks like they might get relegated this year. They've been through a few rebrands lately, and yeah, it's just nothing exciting about Stevenage. Crawley, I think they're just going down as Tinpot, another team that came up because of money. They had Evans as manager when they came up. Gillingham, they're just small. Another team that's hired Steve Evans, but yeah, I'm just going to put them as small. They're probably overachieving this year. Potential playoff place. Northampton, yeah, I'm going to put them as small as well because they're okay. They're nothing special between League 1 and 2. Derby County, I think they go into average. They're a yo-yo club over the last 30 years or so. had their day under Cloughie, but yeah, right. Manchester United. I think nobody's going to argue if we put them into elite. Their record speaks for themselves. Okay, they've not won the Premier League for a few years, but they've won the most top division titles out of anybody. West Brom, your traditional yo-yo club, so they have to go in with, I think, the big clubs like Fulham and Norwich, the teams that keep going up and down. Bradford, I think they go alongside like your Blackpools and that. They're fairly similar in what they did. They got up to the Premier League, which was absolutely fantastic for them, but unfortunately, dropping out of the Premier League kind of ruined the club. Spurs, I think we're going to have to put them as massive. They're not elite because they don't win enough to become elite. Luton, they go into small. They're in a division where they probably shouldn't be at the moment in terms of size, but it does look like they'll come straight back down. Morecambe, they're tiny. They're, yeah, okay, decent new ground, but budget, attendances, etc., all pretty tiny. Scunthorpe, they're another yo-yo team in the Football League where they've been up to the Championship, but then they've been down to League Two, and they've struggled as well a little bit. Swansea, I'm going quite small because it was, the start of the noughties when they were in Division 3. They were looking at going out of the Football League, had a fantastic run towards the end of the season to stay up, and haven't really looked back since. They've moved from the Vetch to the Liberty, and they've done all right. Birmingham, I think they're average. In name, they're a big club for the Championship, but they've been underachieving for the last few years. Liverpool, yeah, they've got to go elite. European champions multiple times. Can't really say much more. Carlisle, I'm going to go so small. They're similar to like your Scunthorpe, where you'd expect them to be like a lower League 1, upper League 2 team all the time, or flitting between the two. Right, Man City, I can't put them elite. They just don't have the history before all the money came in to be anything more than massive. It could be that in 20 years that they're still winning titles, but they've not won anything in Europe. Colchester, tiny, I think. They're a League 2 side. Then, yeah, they're similar to your Mansfields and your Exeters, where you'd expect them just to be in League 2 all the time. Barnsley, there's another team that's played in the Prem. I think there's almost 50 teams that have played in the Premier League at some point. I'm actually going to put them as quite small because I think they seem to budget well, find the right players recently anyway, and yeah, they seem to do all right. Reading, a team that in the Medeski you'd expect them to do pretty well, but I'm actually going to put them quite small because I think actually overall in the Championship they're actually one of the lower teams. Same with Wigan. I think I'm going to put them in the quite small as well. It was just 40, 50 years ago that they were still a non-league team. Yeah, they did their massive rise thanks to Paul Jewell and Dave Whelan winning the FA Cup against City, but they're still a pretty small club. Right, the final two, we've got Middlesbrough, who I think we're going to have to put them in the average category. They're another team that spent plenty of seasons in the top level, but don't look like threatening at all. And then Lincoln City, I'm just going to have to put them, they're similar-ish to Scunthorpe, I think, in a size of club, where they've had a bit of a boost just lately, thanks to the Cowleys mainly, and a bit of money behind them thanks to cup runs, which obviously they've earned themselves. But it wasn't too long ago that they spent several years in the conference. And there we go. There's my tier list. Just 3 elite clubs out of 91. I make Arsenal, Manchester United and Liverpool the 3 elite clubs. Should Chelsea be up there? Should City be up there now? What about Spurs? Are Leeds still a massive club? And then my Tinpot choices are MK Dons, Forest Green, Salford and Crawley. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a like and please subscribe for more videos. Thank you very much for watching.